Thank you for inviting me here today. The only worry I have in this pandemic of webinars is that we mostly end up speaking to the like-minded. I hope that is not the case today and we reach out beyond the confines of those who have already cherished the values of plurality enshrined in the Indian Constitution. In speaking on a forum of Hindus for human rights, let me start by saying that I've never identified myself as a Hindu except when I needed to challenge Hindutva fanatics or those who take pride in the mere biological location of their birth. Born 3 years after independence, even as a child, my identity as a human being was far more persuasive than any other identity. For this I must thank my family of socialist freedom fighters, almost all of whom spent a varying number of years in British jails. As I grew older, awareness of my caste and class privilege became an acute source of guilt, which in turn translated into my drifting first into social work and then into documentary filmmaking. For the last 2.5 decades, most of my films have attempted to warn the people of my country against the rising tide of upper caste-led majoritarianism. I generally don't agree with identity politics, with the exception of oppressed communities that need to temporarily use it to identify and fight their oppressors, as blacks fight racism in USA, or Dalits and Adivasis fight casteism in India, or women fight gender oppression everywhere. But beyond a point, even the identity politics of the oppressed, if it remains exclusivist, can create a barrier that denies possibilities of a larger solidarity movement leading to change. So the contributions of white people who were killed as they fought shoulder to shoulder with their black brothers and sisters during the civil rights movement in America, or the upper caste supporters of Dr. Ambedkar, should not be forgotten. On the other hand, identity politics, when used by privileged sections of society, is generally dangerous, as can be seen when Brahmins or Kshatriyas or white supremacists form their own exclusivist groups. Yet today I recognize that a body like Hindus for Human Rights is responding to a felt need to prevent the cynical hijacking of Hindu identity by a band of upper caste-led hate mongers. This is already a contentious thing to say. Almost a century ago, Dr. Ambedkar rightly pointed out that Brahminical caste oppression is embedded in the most influential of Hindu sacred texts, making the exercise of internal reform a virtual impossibility. Reform has of course been attempted over the centuries, from the Buddha and Mahavir through Kabir and Guru Nanak to the present day. Mahatma Gandhi, for his part, believed that universal values of peace and justice are to be found in every religion. The Hinduism he personally practiced in the form of ahimsa, or non-violence, was rooted in the offshoots of the Bhakti Sufi tradition and was as radically different from caste-driven Hindu Sanatan Dharma as the New Testament of Jesus is from the Torah, where an eye for an eye prevailed. It is actually uncanny that starting at almost opposite ends of the caste hierarchy, both Ambedkar and Gandhi arrived at the same path of ahimsa. And perhaps for the practical reason that the people of India were steeped in religion, both took refuge in the idiom of religion, one in a reformed version of Buddhism and the other in a reformed version of Hinduism. Both endowed their idea of religion with their own ethical values. I'm not equating the two religions, because Buddhism is intrinsically more egalitarian than Hinduism. Apart from being casteless, it does not even entertain the idea of an all-knowing, all-powerful God, let alone a multiplicity of gods and goddesses whom their followers can try to bribe through prayer and donations. Gandhi inherited his Hinduism, but slowly and surely became an ardent reformist. Ambedkar discarded his birth religion and chose Buddhism as the vehicle to liberate his people from the slavery imposed by Hinduism. Instrumentalizing religion was key to both. Ambedkar emphasized rationality as the quality he most admired in his new religion and discarded the irrational idea of reincarnation that many Buddhists still adhere to. Elsewhere, I've written describing Ambedkar and Gandhi as liberation theologists in the same vein that left-wing Latin American Christians turned to Jesus Christ as a revolutionary sent to liberate the masses from injustice and slavery. Yet religion outlasts reformists. Brahminical Hindutva in India, heaping atrocities on minorities and the poor, can be blamed on a caste system that is thousands of years old. That today Buddhists in Myanmar and Sri Lanka are also guilty of atrocities only shows that no religion is safe when power gets concentrated in the hands of a small ruling elite. Religion by itself is not always the main reason for the spreading of hate and violence. Nationalism and the geopolitical designs of powerful nations are equally responsible. To examine the trajectory of the religious poison we see today, we have to go back in time and beyond present-day borders. It's fairly well documented that the idea of Islamic jihad had dissipated in the Middle Ages by the end of the Crusades and was revived for altogether non-religious reasons, first by British colonialists who ruled the Indian subcontinent by pitting Hindus against Muslims, and then by a USA, Saudi, Israeli coalition that used it to gain a foothold in oil-rich parts of the globe, and later to fight a proxy war against the Soviet Union. Al-Qaeda and ISIS and their many offshoots are their long-lasting gift to the globe. The role of superpowers in creating and sustaining Hindutva terror in the subcontinent is less well understood. The British crushed India's first war of independence in 1857 by openly fanning communal discord at a time when Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs had joined the rebel forces. Delhi had been captured by the rebels, and as the British lay a desperate siege of the city from its outskirts, its troops were demoralized. The documents on record are mainly internal letters exchanged between the British forces and their well-paid, trustworthy Indian spies, both Hindu and Muslim, that show how close the British army was to total disarray. And yet, with the odds completely against them, the British prevailed because of the betrayals they successfully induced, just as they had done 100 years earlier at the Battle of Plassey, which first gave them a foothold in India. From here to spreading the rumor that Mughal Emperor Babur had destroyed a temple marking the birthplace of the Hindu god Lord Ram at Ayodhya was a short and easy step, the consequences of which have reverberated with ferocity down to the present day. The Babri Mosque, a declared national monument, was demolished by Hindu militants in 1992, inciting riots that caused thousands of deaths across the subcontinent. In 2010, the Allahabad High Court ruled that the infant god Ram Lalla was a legitimate litigant and granted this baby god 1/3 of the disputed property. In 2020, under the watch of the ruling BJP, the Supreme Court granted full property rights to the very same Hindutva forces that had demolished the Babri Mosque, thereby granting them the very objective of their crime, the building of a new temple to Lord Ram at the exact spot where the Babri Mosque had stood. A few months later, the courts went further into judicial wilderness by acquitting all those accused of the Babri demolition, claiming that this was the work of unidentified antisocials. Antisocials they were, unidentified they certainly were not, as many had been captured on camera and many had openly boasted of their pious deeds. The 2020 Supreme Court judgment itself points to the year 1857 as the date when the temple-mosque dispute first came to light, because the British had then built a demarcation wall in the compound of the mosque. But the significance of the date escaped the notice of the court, and nowhere does its judgment speak of the first war of independence or of the Hindu-Muslim unity it had fostered. In actuality, the evidence of this unity in 1857 was witnessed at Ayodhya itself. An influential Hindu priest, Baba Ramcharan Das, and an influential Muslim landholder, Achan Khan, had made a pact of unity by which Hindus and Muslims could pray inside the compound of the mosque. This pact lasted almost 100 years, until 1949, when Hindu militants broke into the mosque at night and installed Ram idols there. Back in 1857, after the British had crushed the revolt, they hanged both Achan Khan and Ramcharan Das. That few remember these martyrs for communal harmony is an indictment of our education system, even before it had been openly saffronized. As it is past 3 a.m. where I live, I am assuming that most listeners online today are from the USA. So let me first congratulate you for having rid yourselves of Donald Trump. Or at least that is the most likely scenario at present. The horrific damage Trump has caused will live on, or I should say die on, in terms of human lives lost to COVID and the destruction of the environment. The US Supreme Court has been saddled with right-wing judges whose terms may last into the next decades. And yet there is palpable hope in the air. Many dynamic new Democrats are slowly but surely climbing the leadership ladder, and on the street, the Black Lives Matter movement has imprinted its multiracial identity across the nation. Many of your TV channels also carry news of this hope and renewal. All this makes me jealous, for we in India are battling a system that is far cleverer and better organized than Trump and his allies ever were. The dictatorship here appears to grow stronger daily through the complete control of money, media, judiciary, military, elections, education, and the rewriting of history. This rewriting is mind-boggling. During the freedom struggle, the adherents of Hindutva openly allied with the British, as did their counterparts from the Muslim League. V.D. Savarkar, who actually coined the term Hindutva, was the only representative of his ideology to go to jail in the Andamans for having supplied a gun that killed a British officer. But while in prison, he sent 5 separate petitions to the British, abjectly begging for mercy and promising lifelong allegiance to them if released. He kept his promise. After release, he never spoke against the British, but went on to mastermind the murder of Mahatma Gandhi. Today, anyone who speaks out is endangered. If the dissident belongs to a minority, the danger is often physical. Even if the dissident belongs to the majority community, if he or she is actually capable of reaching a wide base, the danger can still be physical, as we witnessed in the killings of Dr. Narendra Dabholkar, Comrade Govind Pansare, Professor Kalburgi, and Gauri Lankesh. The establishment has invented various terms for each type of dissident. Dalits are Maoist Naxalites, Muslims are Islamic Jihadis, upper caste dissidents are urban Naxalites, and so on. All of them can be thrown into jail without trial under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA. To name just a very few of the hundreds of wrongfully arrested people under UAPA, Umar Khalid, who recently got his PhD from JNU, has been in jail now for over 2 months for speaking out against the discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act. And journalist Siddiq Kappan has been in a UP jail for well over a month for attempting to report on the horrific rape murder of a young Dalit woman in Hathras in Uttar Pradesh. Only the very brave now speak out when our constitution is bypassed and the special status granted to Kashmir upon accession is reversed without the consent of the Kashmiri people. Mahatma Gandhi had said at the time that the fate of Kashmir can only be decided by the people of Kashmir. We know what happened to Gandhi. My generation remembers that after Gandhiji's murder at the hands of Brahmin conspirators, many Brahmins faced the wrath of the people. The RSS and Hindu Mahasabha was banned and went underground. Even after the ban was lifted, they remained deeply unpopular for decades. Today, Gandhi's murder is reenacted with pride and joy in the city of Mathura, where a temple to his killer has been erected. Of course, the government pretends these elements do not belong to them, even though some of their members in parliament echo the very same sentiments on TV. The government remembers to hang portraits of Gandhi, Ambedkar, and sometimes even Bhagat Singh on its office walls, while ensuring that none of their ideas ever strain the mindsets of people. As the complicit mass media either stays silent or celebrates India's transition from a country that won independence largely through non-violent struggles to a country that is willing to sacrifice the security of its oppressed and impoverished millions for the fake security provided by obtaining ever fancier weapons of mass destruction, many of us are struggling to find an adequate response, perhaps ironically waiting for an act of God. One thing we do know: for the resistance we mount to have any chance of success, it must be non-violent and all-enveloping and cut across caste and creed, a coalition of believers and non-believers. Their bow and arrow will be met by our rainbow. Thank you.